Hi, I'm Peter Hunt from the Program Committee in the University of California, San Francisco. We're off to a great start on Monday at CROI. We had two great plenary sessions to start the morning. One from Ilesh Jani talking about prevention efforts and how if we focus our resources on the people most at risk for HIV, we get the most bang for our buck in a time when we have reduced resources available for prevention around the world. So a really important talk. That was followed up by a really incredible talk by Wes Sundquist, who's one of the scientists who first discovered how the HIV capsid works. And it's the basic science behind the development of a real powerhouse in prevention now, lenacapavir, that once every 6-month injection that can completely suppress HIV transmission in clinical trials. And so a really terrific morning. I'll next talk about a couple of the oral abstracts that I heard this morning in the comorbidity session. One really important talk from sub-Saharan Africa showing the high burden of heart failure in people with HIV in sub-Saharan Africa, in this case from South Africa. And it's mostly diastolic dysfunction, or what the cardiologists call heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. That seems to be really increased in people with HIV, and in particular among women with HIV, more so than men, which is really interesting, and the investigators are going to be doing some follow-up studies to understand that more. We also heard more data from the big REPRIEVE trial of pitavastatin in people with HIV. We learned this morning that not only did it reduce heart disease, it actually improved blood pressure too, which is new information. We think that's mediated by suppression of a hormone in the body called aldosterone, which impacts blood pressure. But there's going to be more research on the mechanisms of that to come. There was also a really important presentation from the NA Accord study. That's a massive cohort study around North America that focused in on an up-and-coming cancer that's really rising in people with HIV, oropharyngeal cancers that are often related to human papillomavirus. That's really increased high in people with HIV compared to the general population. And what they found is that the incidence of this cancer has tripled in the last 20 years among people with HIV, and particularly among heterosexual men, interestingly, more so than men who have sex with men, and also among people who smoke tobacco and use alcohol. So those are, it's a really important cancer. Cancer is now the leading cause of death among people with HIV in the United States, and so I think that was a really important presentation, highlighting that morbidity. And then lastly, there were two presentations, two large clinical trials among people with disseminated tuberculosis. So really sick with tuberculosis, and oftentimes this carries very high mortality, and so TB investigators have been trying to figure out how best to manage this, and we looked at two different approaches this morning. One was intensifying the therapy using higher doses of the anti-tuberculous drugs to see if that might help, and that ended up increasing mortality, so that made things worse. So we now know that giving more drug does not improve the situation, and we also know now that giving anti-inflammatories, at least prednisone, also doesn't seem to reduce mortality in the situation. So it remains a really big problem, particularly for people with HIV in the modern era who still have an increased risk of disseminated tuberculosis. So that's all I got.